Absolutely. So I'm intellectually interested in power laws. And so I go back and I say, all right, well, what do my investments look like? And, I think both, they do end up being on a power law curve. And also it's somewhat predictive. So, if you say like, well, they're going to end up on a power law and where are they now? You can kind of say like, all right, what's going to happen here? And so it is definitely helped me in that way. I mean, you can't say like, it's predictive to a point, right? If it was really predictive, you'd say, well, I'm going to invest only in the companies that are at the top end of the power law and not the others, right? And you just you can't know which is which, right? But that line of thought where you say, well, I know they're going to end up with a few being outstanding and a bunch really kind of not working at all, but I don't know which ones. It actually helps you think about what you should invest in, right? Because if you say like, well, you know what, I'm going to invest in this great company, and I'm also going to invest in this kind of like less than great company, like a company that's not quite as good. If you can say that, then you shouldn't invest in the second company because you don't know which one's going to succeed, but you can't pick companies that are that don't have the possibility of being the outlier, right? I mean, it's just, if you could, then you would only pick the outliers and you wouldn't have a power law, right? So the idea that things turn out to be a power law no matter what you do means that you should only pick the outstanding companies, the companies that have the opportunity to be outliers. And everything else you just shouldn't pick. You shouldn't invest in. And that's just, I think, right? I mean, does that make sense? It's kind of a backwards way of thinking.
How do you understand that this is an outlier startup? It's a very difficult question. For example, do you believe on consensus in investment committees? How do you make your decisions? What is your framework?
So for me, well, the specific question, how do you know if it's an outlier, right? I mean, you can't know it's going to be an outlier, but what you have to be open to is the possibility of it being an outlier. Like, is there a way for this to be $1 billion company? Like, is there a scenario in which this company is $1 billion company? And when you start thinking about it, it's kind of surprising how many companies can't be. So, I had a company come to me and said, look, we're using artificial intelligence to predict the stock market. Okay. And they wanted to raise money and they were going to, sell this software to hedge funds so they could make better returns. And you say, well, could this be $1 billion company? And the answer is clearly no, right? Because if they're successful, then everybody uses it and then nobody makes money using it, right? So because it's a market that people trade against each other, so that nobody would then buy it, right? So the only way you could make $1 billion is if you used it yourself to trade. And if you were doing that, you wouldn't raise money from me, right? Because if you could actually beat the stock market, you would just borrow $100 from your parents or your grandparents and go out and start trading the stock market and turn that $100 into $1 million and then turn the $1 million into $100 million. Why would you need my money, right? So there are some ideas where it can't possibly be big enough. And another company I saw, one of the ones where the founder said, look, there's $50 million of revenue in this market, and we think we can take all of it, or at least 90% of it. Say, okay, that would be great. You would have 95% of this market. And I believed it, but it's still not an outlier, right? It's still, a medium-sized company. So I think you have to think about that.